Every single day, billions of people consume more than they actually need. More food, bigger portions, endless snacks. But here's the question. What if this isn't just a coincidence? What if some of the world's biggest companies discovered how to turn one of humanity's oldest weaknesses into a multi-billion-dollar business? If you ask someone today what gluttony means, they'll probably say, eating too much. And they're not wrong, but they're not entirely right either. For centuries, gluttony wasn't simply about overeating. It was about wanting more than you actually needed. More food, more comfort, more pleasure. The inability to stop, even after you'd had enough. And that's what makes it such a fascinating sin. Because for most of human history, having enough wasn't something most people experienced very often. There were no supermarkets, no refrigerators, no food delivery apps. For the average person, putting food on the table took hours of work. Some families spent nearly all of their income simply trying to eat. A bad harvest, a harsh winter, or a single drought could mean hunger for an entire community. So why was gluttony considered such a serious sin in a world where so many people struggled just to survive? Because it was never really about food. It was about excess. The moment survival turned into indulgence. The moment enough became a little more. And human nature hasn't changed much since then. We still love food. We celebrate with it. Comfort ourselves with it. Bring it to birthdays, weddings, holidays. Food has always been more than fuel. It's emotion, it's culture, it's memory. And eventually, someone realized something incredibly important. If food could make people feel good, maybe those feelings could be sold, not the food itself, the desire for it. Because unlike hunger, desire doesn't disappear so easily. You can only eat one dinner, but you can always be tempted by dessert, or a snack, or a bigger drink, or just one more bite. And once businesses understood that difference, everything changed. The goal was no longer just to feed people. It was to make them want one more bite. But how do you actually do that? How do you make someone who's already full still want another chip, another cookie, another slice? The answer is surprisingly scientific. When people think about the food industry, they usually imagine chefs, someone standing in a kitchen, trying to cook the perfect meal. But that's only part of the story. Behind many of the foods you buy every week, there's another kind of expert. Not a chef, a scientist. In the 1970s, a market researcher named Howard Moskowitz was asked a surprisingly simple question. How sweet should a drink be? Most people thought there had to be one perfect answer, one perfect recipe, one perfect amount of sugar. Moskowitz disagreed, so instead of guessing, he started testing. Dozens of recipes, thousands of people, again and again, until something interesting appeared. A curve, right at the top, was the point people enjoyed the most. Not too sweet, not too bitter, just enough to make them want another sip. He called it the bliss point. That idea changed the food industry because companies realized they didn't have to make food healthier, or bigger, or even objectively better. They just had to make it harder to put down. Years later, Moskowitz worked with Dr. Pepper. To create a new flavor, his team prepared 61 different formulas. Then they organized almost 4,000 taste tests across the United States. Think about that. Thousands of people, just to answer one question. Which version makes you want another sip? And sweetness was only the beginning. Food scientists studied everything. The amount of salt, the amount of fat, how crunchy a potato chip should sound, how quickly chocolate should melt, even how long a flavor should stay in your mouth. Because your brain doesn't experience food with just your tongue. It experiences the entire moment. Scientists even have a name for foods designed this way: hyperpalatable foods. Products that combine fat, salt, sugar, and refined carbohydrates in combinations that make them especially rewarding to eat. A recent study estimated that around 62% of packaged foods in American grocery stores fit that definition. Take a look around the next time you're in a supermarket. Statistically, more than half of the packaged food you see was carefully optimized to be as enjoyable as possible. But here's something even more interesting. If taste alone determined everything, one of Coca-Cola's biggest mistakes should have been impossible. In 1985, the company introduced New Coke. In blind taste tests, many people actually preferred the new formula. On paper, it was a better drink. So why did it fail? Because people weren't only attached to the taste, they were attached to the memory, the habit, the brand. Changing the flavor meant changing an experience people had grown up with. Within months, Coca-Cola brought the original recipe back. That's when something became clear. The food industry wasn't just selling ingredients anymore. It was selling anticipation, comfort, routine, cravings. Because hunger disappears after a meal. But cravings have a funny way of coming back. Sometimes all they need is the memory of one perfect bite, or one more bite. But creating cravings was only half the business. The next challenge was even more profitable. How do you convince someone who's already buying lunch to spend just a little bit more? By the 1980s, the food industry had become incredibly good at creating cravings. But there was still one problem. A person could only eat so much. No matter how delicious your burger was, eventually people stopped eating. So companies started asking a different question. Not, how do we find more customers? But, how do we earn more from the customers we already have? One of the simplest answers was sitting right in front of them. Portion size. When the first McDonald's opened in 1955, a Coca-Cola was just 7 ounces, about 200 milliliters. Today, depending on the country, you can order drinks 4 or even 5 times that size. So here's a question. Did people become 4 times thirstier? Of course not. Our idea of what counts as normal changed. Quietly. Over decades. One size at a time. And that's the clever part. Nobody forces you to buy the large drink, the medium, or the family bucket. You choose it yourself. But notice how the choice is presented. A small meal costs $5, a large meal, $6. For just $1 extra, you get bigger fries, a bigger drink, sometimes even dessert. It feels like saving money, even though you're spending more than you planned. This strategy is called upselling, and it's used almost everywhere. Not because companies are trying to trick you, because it works. Now here's something most people never think about. That extra drink doesn't cost the company an extra $1, not even close. For many restaurants, the syrup inside a soft drink costs only a tiny fraction of its selling price. The cup is bigger. The customer feels like they got a bargain, and the company earns a larger profit. Everyone leaves happy, which is exactly why the strategy spread across the entire industry. Then came another idea. Combo meals, a burger, fries, a drink. Bought separately, they're more expensive. Bought together, they feel like a bargain. And that's exactly the point. You came in planning to buy a burger. Now you're walking out with 3 products instead of 1. Not because someone forced you, but because the better deal felt impossible to ignore. This idea became so common that many people stopped noticing it. But psychologists have. Research has repeatedly shown that when larger portions are served, people tend to eat more, often without realizing it. Not because they're greedier, not because they suddenly became hungrier, simply because more food was placed in front of them. Sometimes, the hardest decision isn't whether to eat, it's when to stop. And that's when I realized something. The food industry was never really selling bigger portions. It was selling A better deal. Because nobody walks into a restaurant hoping to spend more money, but almost everyone likes feeling like they made a smart decision, even if that decision comes with a few hundred extra calories. By this point, companies had figured out how to make food more tempting. They had figured out how to increase the size of every order. It seemed like the perfect business. But then, the smartphone arrived, and suddenly, food no longer had to wait for you. It could find you first. For decades, the food industry had one frustrating problem. Even if you made the perfect burger, you still had to wait for someone to walk through the door. No customer, no sale. Simple. But then the smartphone changed everything. For the first time in history, restaurants no longer had to wait for hungry people. Now they could remind them. Think about the last time you ordered food. Were you actually hungry, or did something remind you? Maybe a notification. Free delivery today? Maybe a discount. 20% off if you order in the next hour. Or maybe you were just scrolling. Companies discovered something incredibly valuable. You don't have to create hunger. You only have to interrupt someone's day at exactly the right moment. Because cravings don't always begin in your stomach. Sometimes they begin on your screen, and social media made that even easier. Open TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. How long does it take before you see food? 30 seconds? A minute? A burger cut perfectly in half. Cheese stretching in slow motion. Chocolate being poured over a cake. A knife breaking through crispy fried chicken. These videos have a name. Food porn. Not because they're inappropriate, but because they're designed to trigger desire. They exaggerate. They dramatize. They make ordinary food look irresistible. Then, something even stranger happened. Millions of people started watching other people eat. Mukbang. If someone had described that idea 100 years ago, it would have sounded ridiculous. People will spend hours watching strangers eat noodles on the internet. Why? Because food had stopped being just food. It had become entertainment. And here's where things get interesting. Platforms like TikTok don't actually care whether you watch burgers, cats, or football. They care about one thing: attention. If food keeps you watching, the algorithm will happily show you more food. Because every extra second you spend scrolling is another opportunity to show another ad, another restaurant, another promotion, another craving. Delivery apps learned the same lesson. Companies like DoorDash and Uber Eats collect enormous amounts of data, not to judge what you eat, but to understand when you order, what you reorder, and which offers make you come back. That information helps personalize recommendations and promotions, making them more relevant to each customer. Not because someone is secretly controlling you, because personalization works. The easier it is to say yes, the more often people do. And that's the biggest difference between today's food industry and the one that existed 50 years ago. Back then, companies competed for your money. Today, they compete for your attention first. Because attention becomes curiosity. Curiosity becomes a craving. And cravings become orders. One notification, one recommendation, one click, one more bite. But here's the question that stayed with me. If businesses can profit from something as ordinary as our appetite, what else can they profit from? Because maybe this story was never really about food. Maybe food was simply the easiest place to start. At this point, it would be easy to say that food companies are the villains, but that wouldn't be true, because the story was never really about villains. It was about incentives. Companies exist to grow, to compete, to survive. And in a competitive market, finding ways to sell a little more isn't unusual. It's expected. The interesting part isn't that companies make money. It's how they make it. Not by creating hunger, but by understanding people, understanding habits, understanding emotions, understanding the tiny decisions we barely notice. Think about everything we've talked about. Scientists searching for the perfect balance of sugar and salt. Restaurants making a larger meal feel like a better deal. Delivery apps waiting for the right moment to send a notification. Algorithms learning which food videos keep you watching. None of these things guarantee that you'll buy something. They simply increase the chances that you will. One decision at a time. And that's why this story matters. Because gluttony didn't disappear. It evolved. Hundreds of years ago, people warned about eating more than you needed. Today, the challenge is different. We live in a world where more is constantly available. More flavors, more choices, more convenience, more recommendations, more reasons to take one more bite. There's a statistic that says a lot about the world we've built. According to the United Nations, more than 1 billion tons of food are wasted every year. At the same time, hundreds of millions of people still experience hunger. We produce more food than any generation before us. Yet our relationship with food has never been more complicated. But maybe food was never the real lesson, because once you understand the pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. Attention, convenience, status, entertainment. Human weaknesses don't disappear. They adapt. And sooner or later, someone figures out how to build a business around them. Not because humanity is evil, not because companies are evil, but because markets respond to human nature. And human nature rarely changes. So the next time you see make it a large, or free delivery if you order now, or people also bought, pause for just a second. Not because you should always say no. Sometimes the larger meal really is worth it. Sometimes dessert is exactly what you want. That's not the point. The point is simply to notice, to recognize the moment. Because awareness is something no advertisement can sell you. So, the next time someone offers you just one more bite, ask yourself one question. Is this my decision, or is someone hoping it will be? For thousands of years, gluttony was seen as a human weakness. Today, it's also a business opportunity. And maybe that's the most interesting part of all.